Welcome to Life Stories, where extraordinary tales unfold. Today, we bring you the story of a young man who defied all odds and took control of his own fate. Alex Carter, just 19 years old, stood in court accused of grand theft auto, facing what seemed like an unwinnable case. But what happened next stunned everyone in the room, from the judge to the prosecutor. With no lawyer by his side, Alex used his knowledge and courage to dismantle the prosecution's case, changing the course of his life forever. Hit that subscribe button and let's begin today's story. It was a warm morning in Los Angeles. The kind of day where the sun seemed to hang just a bit too long in the sky, as if trying to stretch the day out beyond its limits. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. There was an unspoken buzz in the gallery, people murmuring to each other, speculating about the case that was about to unfold. All eyes were on the young man standing at the defendant's table. His shoulders stiff, his chin slightly lifted, as if he were challenging the very space around him. Alex Carter, just 19 years old, was accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. His case, at first glance, appeared to be straightforward. He had been caught in a stolen car, fleeing the scene when police attempted to arrest him. The evidence, the prosecution said, spoke for itself. A stolen Audi, a chase through downtown, fingerprints found on the steering wheel. It seemed like an open and shut case. But Alex didn't look like someone who was in trouble. Instead, he had the air of someone who was completely at ease, even if the charges against him could lead to years in prison. Judge Thomas Williams, a man who had been on the bench for over 30 years, looked down at Alex from his high seat with a mixture of disdain and amusement. The courtroom had gone quiet as Judge Williams drummed his fingers lazily on the polished wood of his desk. He peered over the rim of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. The audience could feel the tension rise, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like an invisible fog. "You think you're some kind of legal expert, don't you?" Judge Williams's voice carried with a dry amusement that seemed almost patronizing. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, seemed to be in on the joke. They saw a teenager standing in front of them, likely terrified and unsure. Yet the way Judge Williams spoke suggested that he believed he was dealing with someone completely out of their depth. But Alex didn't flinch. He didn't laugh either. In fact, his face remained completely neutral, almost expressionless. For the people in the room, it was impossible to guess what he was thinking. The courtroom continued to murmur, eyes shifting between the judge and the defendant, until Alex finally broke the silence. Alex had spent years preparing for this moment, not for the exact situation. Of course, no one plans to find themselves in front of a judge under such circumstances. But Alex had spent his life preparing for the courtroom, in a way no one could have imagined. His mother, Denise Carter, had worked as a legal assistant for over 2 decades. And growing up, Alex had heard the stories she brought home. He had heard how prosecutors would cut corners, how judges would play favorites, how defense attorneys sometimes didn't seem to care about the truth at all. Alex had absorbed all of it, spending his childhood not memorizing basketball stats or video game cheat codes, but instead memorizing case law, studying legal procedures, practicing arguments in his head. He was a teenager, yes, but his understanding of the law far surpassed that of many seasoned lawyers. Yet, to Judge Williams, Alex was just another kid in trouble. He leaned back in his chair, a dismissive sigh escaping his lips. "Let's make this quick," the judge muttered, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, the humor lightening the atmosphere, at least for them. But something shifted in Alex's expression. His lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. It was the kind of look that someone who had spent years learning the ins and outs of legal battles would give when they knew they had just spotted their opponent's first mistake. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood with the confidence of someone who had delivered the same speech 100 times before. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted. He seemed sure that this was just another easy case to win. With a practiced air, he began his opening statement. "Your Honor, The state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Alex Carter, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6. Reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence speaks for itself. The words landed with weight. The gallery shifted uncomfortably as whispers filled the air. The case seemed clear-cut. A stolen car, a chase, and an arrest. Even Judge Williams nodded in agreement. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, as if savoring the certainty of the case. But Alex wasn't convinced. He had spent too many years studying trials to not see the cracks in the prosecution's story. He stayed silent, watching and waiting. Carrington continued, turning to address the jury. The defense may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Alex Carter is an unfortunate victim of circumstance. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police? The tension in the room thickened. Judge Williams, already looking like he was ready to move on, raised an eyebrow and glanced at Alex. Alex, however, remained calm, unwavering. His eyes didn't blink. He wasn't intimidated by the prosecutor's theatrics. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. As the prosecutor finished his opening statement, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was the kind of silence that made even the smallest sound feel like an explosion. All eyes were on Alex as he stood motionless, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. The air was thick, charged with the weight of expectation. Everyone in the courtroom was waiting for him to react, to speak, to defend himself. But Alex simply stood there, his gaze steady, unwavering. The judge looked at him, clearly expecting something, a stammered defense, perhaps, or the typical public defender's hesitant attempt to save face. But instead, Alex spoke with quiet confidence that startled the room. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but steady. "I'll be representing myself." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a declaration that stunned everyone in the room. For a moment, there was a collective intake of breath. And then the murmurs started. The bailiff raised his eyebrows. The stenographer's pen froze in mid-sentence. And even the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, let out a short, almost amused laugh. "This should be interesting," he muttered under his breath. But no one was laughing anymore. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "You'll what?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. It was as if he couldn't comprehend why anyone, especially someone so young, would want to take on the responsibility of defending themselves in a courtroom. The judge's reaction was typical of someone who had spent years presiding over cases with defendants who relied on public defenders or lawyers with years of experience. But Alex wasn't like the others. "I'll be defending myself," Alex repeated, his voice unwavering. He wasn't rattled. There was no hesitation in his words. The courtroom seemed to freeze for a moment, as if everyone in the room had collectively held their breath. Even the prosecutor, Carrington, who had been so confident moments before, seemed a little unsure of how to proceed. Alex stepped forward, his body language calm, his demeanor steady. He wasn't the nervous teenager that people expected him to be. Instead, he moved with purpose, as if he were walking into a space he had been in 100 times before. The tension in the room was thick, but Alex didn't let it affect him. He had prepared for this moment for years. And now it was his time to show everyone that he wasn't just some kid who had gotten himself into trouble. He was someone who had the knowledge, the skill, and the determination to fight back. "Your Honor," Alex said, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "Before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed that Alex was taking control of the proceedings. "Go ahead," he said, crossing his arms, his patience wearing thin. Alex took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed firmly on Carrington. "You said Officer Nathan Brooks personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Carrington's jaw tightened, but he answered with a sigh. "That's right. And that testimony is written in his report?" Alex pressed, his voice sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. "Of course it is," Carrington responded, already bored. his tone dismissive. Alex nodded slowly, turning to Judge Williams. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor's face flickered with confusion. What are you talking about? Carrington snapped, his patience running thin. Alex didn't flinch. He took another step forward, his confidence growing with each passing second. Officer Brooks was not on duty when the chase began. He never saw me in that car. In fact, I can prove it. The room was still now, the audience waiting for Alex to reveal his evidence. The air in the courtroom seemed to shift, a sudden chill creeping in as Alex prepared to make his move. If the court allows me, Alex continued, his voice steady, I'd like to request Officer Brooks's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then his location history should match what he claims. But I have a feeling it won't. The tension in the room ratcheted up. Whispers started among the gallery as they realized that Alex wasn't just bluffing. He had a plan. The prosecutor, Carrington, opened his mouth to protest. But Alex cut him off. If Officer Brooks was where he said he was, then the GPS data will prove it, Alex said. But if he wasn't, he let the sentence trail off, leaving the implication hanging in the air like a challenge. Judge Williams looked from Alex to Carrington, his brow furrowed. Does the prosecution have any objections to verifying the officer's GPS logs? Carrington hesitated. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, he cleared his throat, his confidence cracking. No objections, Your Honor, he said reluctantly. The tension in the room shifted once more. The smirks that had filled the courtroom moments earlier were gone. The prosecutor, who had been so sure of his victory, was now visibly rattled. Alex had turned the tables. And for the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing. It was waiting, holding its breath. The air in the courtroom had changed. The buzz of uncertainty was no longer just a hum in the background. It was the dominant force now. Alex Carter had thrown a wrench into the smooth machinery of the prosecution's case. And everyone felt it, even the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, who had been so confident just moments ago, seemed to be scrambling to keep up. As Alex stood tall in front of the jury, his voice calm and controlled, it was as if he had transformed before their eyes. The teenager who had once been dismissed as just another kid in trouble was now a formidable force in the courtroom. And he wasn't done yet. Alex took a deep breath, allowing the silence to stretch, making the weight of the moment even more palpable. His gaze turned toward the jury, meeting each of their eyes with a kind of calm certainty that only someone who knew they were in control could possess. You've heard the prosecution's story, Alex began, his voice steady. They want you to believe that finding my fingerprints on a stolen car means I stole it. But let's think about this for a second. He paused, letting the question hang in the air like a challenge. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, drawn in by the gravity of his words. Imagine this, Alex continued, his tone clear and logical. You walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You touch it, maybe zip it up, maybe not. You put it back on the rack. And you walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. Would your fingerprints on that jacket make you the thief? A few jurors exchanged looks. Some seemed to be considering the analogy, while others glanced at the prosecutor, clearly uncomfortable with how this was unfolding. The courtroom, which had once been full of murmurs and quiet chuckles, was now hanging on every word Alex spoke. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. Alex continued, I was inside that store with 3 friends. Yes. When we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door, because it was already unlocked. But I didn't take the car. I didn't drive it. I didn't steal anything from inside. It was just a dumb moment of curiosity. The room was silent now. There were no murmurs, no shuffling of papers. Alex's words had cut through the courtroom like a scalpel, exposing the cracks in the prosecution's case. And now, they want you to believe that touching something makes me a criminal? Alex's voice had a sharp edge to it now, and he turned to look at the jury. His eyes were unwavering, his confidence growing by the second. Let me ask you, does touching something make you a criminal? The question hung in the air, and the weight of it settled over everyone. Carrington, who had been so sure of his case, now looked flustered. His mouth was tight, and he was flipping through his notes, clearly searching for something to regain control. But Alex wasn't finished yet. He had seen the holes in the case, and he wasn't about to let the prosecution hide behind them. "Let's talk about that fingerprint analysis," Alex said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Was the forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify?" Judge Williams blinked, clearly taken off guard by the question. He glanced at Carrington, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "No," Carrington admitted reluctantly, his voice tight. Alex nodded, as though that was all he needed to hear. He turned back to the jury, his expression unreadable. "So let me get this straight. The prosecution is using forensic evidence to try and convict me. But they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence. No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or challenge the accuracy of the analysis?" Carrington's jaw tightened, but Alex didn't let him off the hook. He pressed forward, his voice firm and unwavering. "That's what this case is really about," Alex said, turning back to the jury. "Bad police work, assumptions, and a system that cares more about closing cases than finding the truth." The room was still, and the weight of Alex's words seemed to sink in with everyone present. Judge Williams, who had initially been dismissive of the young defendant, now seemed to be considering the case with a new level of seriousness. The prosecutor, Carrington, seemed to shrink in front of them, his polished confidence starting to crack. Alex wasn't done yet. He had one more piece of evidence to present, and it would change everything. "Your Honor," Alex said, his voice steady and measured, "I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the stolen vehicle." Judge Williams frowned, clearly confused. "The owner?" he asked. Alex nodded. "Yes. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement to the police that for some reason was never submitted in the prosecution's filings. And I think I know why." Carrington's face had gone pale, and Alex didn't wait for him to respond. He pulled out a printed transcript from his file and read aloud the damning words. "I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The truth was out now. The case wasn't as simple as the prosecution had made it out to be. Alex had proven it, and there was no going back. As the words hung in the air, the courtroom was still. The tension that had filled the room just moments before had been replaced by a stunned silence. Everyone knew that the case had unraveled, and Alex Carter had done what no one thought possible. He had outmaneuvered a seasoned prosecutor and a confident judge with nothing but his sharp mind and a deep understanding of the law. Judge Williams sat back, rubbing his temples as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He glanced at the jury, whose expressions had shifted from uncertainty to recognition. The facts were clear now, and the prosecution's case had crumbled. Carrington, once so sure of his victory, stood speechless, the confidence drained from his face. Alex, however, stood tall, his posture unwavering. He had done more than defend himself. He had exposed the flaws in a system that was quick to judge and slow to question. His victory wasn't just a win for him, it was a reminder that the truth would always find its way to the surface, even when the odds were stacked against it. "Case dismissed," Judge Williams finally said, his voice low but clear. The courtroom erupted in chaos, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief, but Alex remained calm, stepping out of the courtroom with a quiet sense of accomplishment. As he left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around him, asking questions, but Alex didn't care for the spectacle. He wasn't interested in proving how smart he was. This was about something bigger, something that would change the course of his life. If this story made you think even for a second, then share it, hit that like button and subscribe for more life stories that matter. Because next time, it might not be Alex. It might be someone you know.